Welcome to an hour of HealthMade Radio. HealthMade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. A core concept belief is in the innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. HealthMade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I will be your host. Today's guest is Dr. Chris Shade. Born in the toxic steel town, Dr. Shade created Quicksilver Scientific to combat the environmental toxicity he personally experienced. Inspired by philosophy, guided by science, and driven to create, he patented a mercury speciation diagnostic process to analyze human toxicity. In addition, he created Quicksilver delivery systems, nanoparticle technology to increase the bioavailability of supplements and protocols leading to higher efficacy products without the prick of a needle. For more than a decade, Dr. Shade has worked alongside practitioners to fine-tune a system and its applications to restore, maintain, and advance health. Dr. Shade is regularly sought out to speak as an educator on the topics of mercury, environmental toxicities, neuroinflammation, immune dysregulation, and the human detoxification system for practitioners and patients in the United States and internationally. He has helped corporate executives, professional athletes, celebrities, children with autism, patients with chronic immune disorders, and more. He strives to evolve the way the medical industry delivers care, and he is perpetually broadening the way the world understands health. Dr. Shade, it's such an honor to have you on the show again, and I'm so excited to talk about this subject of the endocannabinoid systems, CBD, THC, and the promises that they hold in regards to our health and well-being.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and it's a really exciting aspect of integrative medicine that we've had just sort of come up in the last 10 years that I at first didn't take super seriously, and then I found that it's probably the most important thing that's come to us as a tool in the last 30 minutes, in the last 30 years, because of how deeply integrated into homeostasis it is. I mean, its ability to just bring everything to the middle and balance the yin and yang poles is something that we've been needing so badly in our very unbalanced society.
And one thing, we're talking about the endocannabinoid system. I mean, this is something that we've recently started to discover and talk about, but is this something that is new? Is this something that's existed before? Are we the only ones that have it? Tell me a little bit more about it.
That's a great lead up, because I have this slide I'd like to use from, it was the D.C. Department of Health. And it's talking about the endocannabinoid system and its place in evolution. So about 600 million years ago, as we evolved past the level of an insect to the level of the sea squirt, the endocannabinoid receptors showed up. And in anything more evolved from that, you have the endocannabinoid system. So this isn't something that we developed out here in Boulder County as an excuse to smoke pot. This has been a central part of evolution for hundreds of millions of years.
So this pretty much means that it's such an essential part of our system, and it's existed and it's driven our existence for all these millions and millions of years. So to discredit the need to support that system seems ludicrous to me.
Absolutely ludicrous.
So how would we? I mean, so we're talking about endocannabinoid system, and then we have people talking about CBD and cannabis, and how do we tie all these things together?
Right. So first, let's think about endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids. So the word phyto means plant, so that's a plant-based cannabinoid, and the word endo means inner, so that's a cannabinoid that we make ourselves. And the definition of what a cannabinoid is something that activates cannabinoid receptors, meaning that we have cannabinoid receptors inside our body, and phytocannabinoids can act on those. So we've had a system called the endocannabinoid system that is comprised of a series of receptors and a series of chemicals that we make that activate those receptors. So first let's talk about the receptors, and then we'll talk about the endocannabinoids that activate them and the phytocannabinoids that activate them. So the two main receptors are the CB1, cannabinoid 1, and the CB2, or cannabinoid 2 receptor. The CB1 receptor is the thing that we were most sort of intimately aware of, especially in the 60s and beyond, because it's the thing that THC acts on, and it is in our central nervous system. So it's in our brain and spinal column, and THC is a cannabinoid or phytocannabinoid that goes in and acts on it and makes us feel high. Now, it's not that it was, we like to say in Boulder that God put that there so that we could smoke pot, but we know better than that. And we have endocannabinoids that act on it, and a lot of their action is around satiety, or, is around appetite, when to be hungry, when to eat, when to feel full. And that's, hence the lore around having the munchies after you smoke pot is because it's hyper-stimulating this receptor that we're supposed to stimulate in order to make us go out and get food. Now, it's also stimulated in the cases of feeling what we used to think were endorphin highs. So runner's high and the bliss of meditation is also associated with the activation of the CB1 receptor, and it's acted on by a endocannabinoid that you make called anandamide. Ananda is the Sanskrit word for bliss, and they called it that because it activates the CB1 receptor. All right, so there's CB1 and CB2. CB1 is in the central nervous system. We know it if we've ever smoked pot. That's how we felt it. We know it when we get hungry. We know it when we have some sort of bliss experience or runner's high. The CB2 is probably more important for our general balance in the body, and it's active in the periphery, not the central nervous system, but in all of the immune cells, and in just differing degrees in all of the organs. And it's responsible for balance. So in the immune system, it's responsible for a balanced inflammatory response. So if we're taking CBD or CBD-THC blends for pain, that's mostly acting on an inflammatory mechanism in the CB2 receptors. All right, so CB1, CB2, and they have endocannabinoids, one of which is called anandamide. I mentioned that. And the other one is called 2-arachidonyl glycerol, or short 2AG. So the biggest dose of, your first big dose of cannabinoids into your body took place the first time you breastfed. Breast milk is very rich in 2-arachidonyl glycerol. And maybe that's your mother getting you high to deal with the pain of existence. But probably not. I'm going to put in all these Boulder County jokes because I'm from Boulder County.
Love it.
But in reality, it's an immune balancer. And so what happens when you come out of the womb is that you've got to deal with this developing sense of self and not self. And I'm sure you probably, on your radio show, had people talk about probiotics and getting probiotics from your mother, and them, while you come through the vaginal canal and while you breastfeed, you're pulling them off of the nipple, and they're helping teach your body the difference between self and not self, so that you can have appropriate responses to food and appropriate responses to pathogens, where the things that aren't bad for you, you ignore, and the things that are really bad, you reject. And people who have not people who have had cesarean births or had too many antibiotics in early life have a difficult response to this. And what's a difficult immune response? A failure to sense self and not self. Allergies are the most common one. So now we know it wasn't just the probiotics, it's the endocannabinoids coming in breast milk that are helping set the immune tone so you don't get overly reactive. And, of course, taking CBD, I will mention, keeps your nervous system poised so you're not hyper-reacting to things. So it's happening at an immune and a neurotransmitter level. So now let me give you my term that I like around the endocannabinoid system. And the term is that it sets neuroendoimmune poise. Neuro is neurotransmitters, and there's a balance between the excitatory neurotransmitter called glutamate and the inhibitory neurotransmitter called GABA. And glutamate is associated with fight or flight in the autonomic response. The autonomic or automatic response is your body using breath rate, heart rate, blood flow to put yourself either into a sympathetic, which is the fight or flight response, or the parasympathetic, which is the relaxed, sort of Zen-like response you get when you rest, digest, repair, regenerate, detoxify. So you should be swinging like a pendulum back and forth between these two things. Oh, I got to get this done. You go into sympathetic. Okay, that's done. I can chill out a little bit. I'm going to have a snack here. You're in parasympathetic. You swing back and forth like that. What happens to us is we get jacked over into sympathetic all the time. We have constant danger responses in our relationships, at work, with our finances, with our driving. We think everything's trying to kill us, and we're stuck over there. So the balance that endocannabinoid tone brings, and we get that mostly from CBD, and we'll talk about that later, is to be able to appropriately go into sympathetic, then come back out into parasympathetic. So that's the neuro aspect. The endo aspect is hormone. And people are just starting to realize in the research community how deeply ingrained the yin-yang system of hormones is with the endocannabinoid system. One of the most fascinating things I've read of late is that, this is only in women, the organ with the highest concentration of CB2 receptors is the uterus, where the CB2 receptors are interacting with endocannabinoids and estrogen to prepare the lining of the uterus for implantation. How fundamental to life can you get? How much more fundamental can you get? And then the last aspect is the immune aspect. Immune, the ability or the poise means the balance to go into inflammation when necessary and come out of inflammation when you don't need inflammation anymore. Inflammation is necessary for microbial defense and for regeneration of damaged tissues, repair and regeneration. So there's times to do it, and then there's times inflammation tends to perpetuate itself. And so you need the immune system to be able to shut off that perpetuation. And the CB2 receptors on the immune system are the brakes on the fire or the dimmer switch on the inflammation. Now, they're not immunosuppressive like people who have rheumatoid arthritis or have different autoimmune conditions will often take immunosuppressive drugs, which then make you more susceptible to infections. CBD doesn't work that way. It's just a dimmer switch. It doesn't shut it off. It brings it back to balance. So the endocannabinoid system and endocannabinoid tone brings that neuroendoimmune poise. That's why it's such a crucial system in the body.
So it seems like, this is one of the most powerful modulators of the most overreaching systems within our body. Talking about obviously our neurological system, electrical activity that reaches every part of the body, our messaging system, and our endocrine system, all our hormones that we produce that communicate to all the tissues, to the cells as to what kind of activity that needs to take place. And then our basic defense and tissue regeneration, which is part of the immune system that helps to fight infections and also help with tissue repair. How more crucial is it? We're going to take a quick break. You're here with Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm chatting with Dr. Chris Shade in regards to the endocannabinoid system. We're listening to Health Made Radio. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Chris Shade. We're talking about the crucial aspect of the endocannabinoid system and how we can influence it with practices of ourselves, but also then using external sources to support the system that's been around for 600 plus millions of years. It's pretty much every kind of species that exists out there have this system, which means, it just shows how important it is. So what was really fascinating to me, we were talking about a baby being born. It gets, through then it goes through the vaginal birth, and with that, it gets all the bacteria from just actually, it may sound a little disgusting, but the little poop in the anal canal from the mother, and gets exposed to that, and that helps to populate then the healthy bacteria, and then it gets also from the bacteria from the nipple. It helps it then to educate the immune system of the child, but then also from the breast milk you get these cannabinoids then to activate the central system, the endocannabinoid system that regulates the hormonal system, regulates your neurological function, your neurotransmitters, your immune system. This is such a crucial system. Yeah,
it's really stunning that it doesn't block anything. It allows everything to work in proper measure, and just because we thought about getting high for so long, we kind of ignored it. But in fact, it's a huge deal. And so then people tend to ask, well, all right, well, how do I work with this? And so we talked about the endocannabinoids. And now we'll talk about the phytocannabinoids. So phyto, as I said before, these are plants that activate or work with these receptor systems in the body. And the two main ones that are out there in the cannabis plant are THC and CBD. And, I always like to talk about kind of yin-yang pairs, and this is kind of like that. THC is very active in the central nervous system. It is the thing that's very psychoactive. It gets you very high. It has very strong uses in medicine, but it's a little bit myopic, and it's like a strong trigger pusher in that it can activate these receptors. But in the absence of any guidance system for it, it just gets you really high. Now, CBD, on the other hand, is very different. The CBD barely even activates those receptors. It more highlights the CB2 receptor and makes it more of a target. In fact, scientists don't even know exactly how this happens. But if you have THC alone, it hits almost exclusively CB1 receptors. And like I said, gets you high. But if you have CBD and THC together, you get less high, and it hits more of the CB2 receptors, which are more in this inflammation control and this global homeostatic control.
So it's almost
so when you have CBD,
so it's almost like the CBD is an antidote to the THC high. Then, so if you have both of them, you get the benefit of the THC, but not really that high.
Not as much. It's not like you don't get it. It becomes different. It's more of a global response in the body and this holistic one. And if you like those feelings, you'll see it's a much deeper feeling, and it's a much bigger feeling of well-being. But if you've just had too much THC, CBD can be an antidote for that. drawing sort of the THC's attention away from the CB1 receptor over to the CB2 receptor. But then CBD does all these other things. So, like I said, it sets up the CB2, but it doesn't actually press the button. Yet they find that the CB2 is activated when you take CBD. So then they found that what it does is it builds up the concentration of your endocannabinoids. So we have these two main endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG. And for 2-AG, it stimulates production of 2-AG, so there's more 2-AG to work with. And for anandamide, it inhibits breakdown of anandamide. So everything that's born must die, and we do this with all of our biochemicals. And so fatty acid amide hydrolase is an enzyme that breaks down anandamide, and CBD blocks that. So the net of those two is that you've built up more 2-AG and more anandamide to activate the receptors, and CBD is then highlighting or bringing attention to the CB2 receptor. But then on other levels, CBD directly upregulates genes involved with antioxidant detoxification chemistry by activating NRF2, which brings up all of the glutathione chemistry. At the same time, it downregulates genes that are activated by a toxin that comes out of our GI tract called endotoxin. When you and I talked about detoxification, we talked about these two end members. Endotoxin that comes out of leaky gut blocks detox and encourages inflammation. Now, the way it encourages inflammation is by turning up pro-inflammatory genes that are only activated when your body thinks it's going to die from an infection. And CBD can quench those and turn those down when it's just endotoxin involved. So it creates this global break on this this very high inflammatory activity and turns up these repair mechanisms. But then in the brain, CBD does something really remarkable. So when you hear me lecture, I'll lecture a lot, and I talked about it in the detox lecture. I talked about it earlier. It is autonomic balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. And the way it reflects in the neurotransmitter balance between glutamate, the excitatory molecule or neurotransmitter, and GABA, the calming or inhibitory neurotransmitter. Now, there's a process in your brain that's an aberrant process, meaning it's not a good one. It's called neuroinflammation. And you'll see this most actively and most obviously expressed in autistic children that are really high wound, the ones that are moving their limbs all the time and are hyper agitated and get really annoyed by sound and light. That's called neuroinflammation. And that's a process when the immune system is activated in the brain. And this stuff called endotoxin is something that activates it really strongly. And the immune system in the brain attacks the nerves in the brain. And it attacks them through the glutamate receptors. And then the nerves in the brain throw out these other attacks back at the immune system. And the whole thing winds way up, and you get this big fire, this neuroinflammatory fire in the brain. And it's really difficult to deal with because, like in the autistic kids, we're trying to detoxify them. We're trying to get their immune system to work on the infections. But under this really strong neuroinflammatory stress, the body can't do any of that. It shuts all those things down. It's just trying to deal with this pain in the brain. But CBD goes in and it quenches the overactive immune cells called the microglia, and it quenches the overactive glutamate receptors on the neurons, and it just stops this neuroinflammatory cycling that's going on. And so I often say it's the most important thing that's come into integrative medicine in 30 years because it's able to turn that off. And if I'm trying to detoxify someone and that neuroinflammatory signal is going on and they're locked into sympathetic because of that, I can't get anything done. So since I've been able to use CBD, I can chill out that neurological background that's stopping me from getting results. And then I can go in and I can activate all these aspects of detox, and I can get great results very, very quickly. So it's super important.
So it almost seems like if you're going to do any kind of detoxification, if you do not involve some kind of a hemp product that has CBD in it, you're not really going to get anywhere, because I'm pretty much every one of us are in an inflamed state, and every one of us are dealing with endotoxins, and every one of us, we're in all the stressors that we have around us. All of that is blocking detoxification, and by bringing in then CBD, we can then kind of quench all of that and then allow detoxification to move forward.
Absolutely, and I'll give some caveats around that. CBD is the most helpful of our natural medicines to go in and tune that system up. And when I talked about detoxification, I talked about getting into these parasympathetic states, and there are other ways to get there. And it's just that CBD is probably the easiest one-stop shop. The only caveat, sometimes you'll have kids who have a problem with it, like there's allergies to any substance out there. You'll have a couple of kids here or there that have a paradoxical reaction to it, and instead of calming them down, it winds them up. And so occasionally that's not the way to get there, but 90% of the time it is it's such a great starting point. And I always say we're going to do the detoxification in the backdrop of the CBD. We're going to set the tone with the CBD, and then we can go in and get this done.
Beautiful. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm here with Dr. Chris Shade. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Chris Shade. One thing that I just want to highlight again is, we're talking about how CBD, how it just kind of calms that fire. And you were talking earlier about the immunomodulating effect, meaning that it doesn't shut down the immune system for people then dealing with autoimmune conditions. It helps to modulate it, but with that, when it is hyperactive, it calms it down. So if you're dealing with any kind of autoimmune conditions which are becoming more and more prevalent, especially if we didn't have a vaginal birth and did not get the proper bacteria, then we're more susceptible. So in those aspects, the CBD becomes crucial.
Absolutely. It is so good in autoimmune conditions. Again, not shutting the immune system down. Just so those things, using prednisone and stuff like that, give you some immediate relief that's very potent, but they can lead to so many downstream negative reactions and strong chronic and acute infections that come from that. But CBD doesn't do that. And, if you're rheumatoid, if you're type 1 diabetes, if you're Hashimoto's, CBD is such a great way to calm that fire that's going on while you're trying to get out the root causes of what led you there.
And you were talking about autism and being a neuroinflammatory condition, meaning that the brain is on fire. How about other things like ADD, ADHD? How about those? Are those part of that process as well?
Oh, absolutely. Autism, it's just the end member of it. You're seeing that inflammation so much more strongly than you are in other cases. But for the moms that I talk to that use it for ADHD, for ADD, they get great, or the kids that I talk to, they get great results. And they say, I can go into school, I can focus on things, I don't feel so freaked out when I walk in front of the kids. My social anxiety is down, and they just do so well with it. And I always say for myself, running a very stressful company, it's not that mine is more stressful than others. All companies are stressful, so especially if you grow them at super speed like we do. And you're faced with these things that are outside of your control a lot. And this is one of the aspects of the human mind that it really hates. It stresses out when it thinks it's not under control of something. And CBD was able to take me out of that stress response and enabled me to just put one foot after the other and just get things done. And, we use it at our company for everybody when they get, those times you're overworked and you have that ADD response where you have a million things to do, but you can't focus on a single one of them. And CBD brings you down, like I said, one foot after another, just get this stuff done. Do what you have control over and don't freak out over the things that you don't have control over. And it's just been a game changer that way.
And we're talking about CBD, and you see products out there that says, hype CBD. But from my understanding is that in the hemp plant, there are a lot of different cannabinoids, there are a lot of different phytochemicals, and they all interact synergistically. So the key then seems to be that you want to get them as a kind of like a full spectrum, as a package. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and here we'll just dial in the language a little. Occasionally they're synergistic. Synergistic means, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 3 or 4 or 5. The more you have of them, the more balanced the response is in the body, and often the deeper the response is. We're just getting to where we understand all the different things that are coming together. The thing that we understand the most is the interaction between CBD and THC. And CBD, I said before, kind of gets the receptors ready, and it sets this genetic and neurological tone for activity where the activity is, well, let's say it sets the right tone in the body, so activation of the receptors does the right thing. So THC is like a blind activator. It sets no tone, except that when it hits only the CB1, it gets you high. So when small amounts of THC are brought in along with the CBD sets a neurological or neuroinflammatory tone and sets a tone throughout the body that the THC can act on. And in a raw extract out of a plant, you'll have CBD and a little bit of THC, and the two work together very, very nicely. So that's what's called full spectrum. Then there's something called broad spectrum, which is the next step down the line where you remove some things, and the farthest step is called isolate. So to go to the other end member from full spectrum, you have isolate. Isolate is isolated crystals of CBD. They will still have an effect on the body, but it won't be quite as good as if there are other cannabinoids around in the mix. But beyond cannabinoids, there's also terpenes. These are the essential oils of the plant, and they all have their unique effects. So you've got isolate, that's pure CBD. You've got full spectrum, that's CBD, a little THC, and other cannabinoids such as CBC, CBG, and CBN, CBDV, and THCV. That's our best. Now, during, it's been quite a job trying to keep a business going in the hemp world in the midst of the wishy-washy temperature of Washington on regulation of CBD and THC. And so for a while, a lot of companies went to what was called broad spectrum. Broad spectrum meant that we would remove the THC either through distillation or chromatography and leave the other cannabinoids intact. Now, what's left intact the most is CBD. The THC was removed, and the CBG, CBC, CBDV, those are all lessened a little bit. But that was kind of necessary because if you weren't going to get in trouble with the FDA, you were going to get in trouble with the DEA. Some of these early CBD extracts were like 10-to-1 CBD to THC to 20-to-1 CBD to THC. And if you're taking 100 milligrams of CBD to deal with some pain issue, you would get, 5 to 10 milligrams of THC, sometimes up to 20 milligrams of THC, and that would get you really, really high. And THC actually absorbs better than CBD. So, and then there was people who were trying to use CBD for various things, but they're getting drug tested. Either they're police or firemen, or they're airline pilots, or they're in the military. So there grew this market for a need for THC-free CBD. And one of the tricks that we have to make it work a little bit better is to blend in other phytocannabinoids, especially terpenes like beta-caryophyllene, which actually work on the cannabinoid system and activate the CB2 receptors. And so we started blending other plants with the cannabinoids in order to get the entourage effect that everybody talks about with a raw cannabis.
So there are other plants and that have these different cannabinoids other than the hemp plant.
Yeah, and it's not that there's... Remember, what does phytocannabinoid mean? Phytocannabinoid means it's from a plant source and it activates the cannabinoid receptors. And so beta-caryophyllene, this terpene that is in cannabis, but it's also in high amounts in cinnamon and in clove. You can get it from cinnamon and clove and put it with your CBD, and it will be an activator of the CB2 receptor. And it's just as strong as an andamide into arachidonoglycerol. And then there's compounds in echinacea. Remember, echinacea, we take it as both an immunostimulant and immunomodulatory, and there's compounds in echinacea that are strong agonists for cannabinoid receptors. EGCG from green tea, DIM from cruciferous vegetables. Now, those last two aren't very strong phytocannabinoids. They're not as strong as beta-caryophyllene and the endocannabinoids, but when you look at how many of those compounds activate weakly the endocannabinoid system, you can see why in a very varied plant-based diet, you're going to get large amounts of weak endocannabinoid signalers. And so you start to think about your diet and the way that all these different compounds come together to work on the endocannabinoid system. But then in the cannabis plant, we have this model plant that has the most profound effect on the endocannabinoid system. And when we get really sophisticated about using it, we're going to get away from this model of strains that's used in cannabis medicine now. Like, I'm using this White Widow strain or this Diesel strain, and we're going to see what are the ratios of different cannabinoids and terpenes in each of these plants that gives them unique properties, and we're going to recreate those in a really good medicine with a very good delivery system, like we use a nanoemulsion delivery or a liposome delivery to get high absorption, and we're going to blend the different cannabinoids and terpenes the way we want to get our effect, and then we're going to add in different nutritional compounds like curcuminoids or compounds from green tea and boswellia, other inflammatory modulators or immune modulators to achieve the kind of high-end medicines that we see coming for us in the future, blending phytocannabinoids and nutraceuticals.
It seems like we have a lot of kind of exciting time ahead in regards to what integrative medicine and phytomedicine can offer that does not exist in the medical pharmaceutical field. We're going to take a quick break. I'm here with Dr. Chris Shade, and we're discussing probably one of the biggest discoveries, I wouldn't say discovery, but realization for the last 30 years. You're listening to Health Made Radio. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Chris Shade, and we're talking about the exciting new medicine that that CBD, hemp products, THC that it offers, and then combining that in a very specific way to get a targeted response, because we know so much about these other type of substances. You're talking about boswellia and curcumin and these having very anti-inflammatory, and then I would assume then, like you're mentioning, to bring things like CBD or hemp products in combination with that would enhance the effect, and really I'm really curious to see what the results are we getting from that.
Yeah, it's been a real blessing, and since we're down in Colorado, we can do a lot of experimentation with different ratios of THC and CBD, along with because we have such a big R&D lab, along with all of these different compounds. And right now, my favorite blends are curcuminoids with cannabinoids and other anti-inflammatory compounds. Like I said, the boswellia. We also put in things like silymarin for liver processing. If we're looking at metabolic chemistry, we're putting in AMPK activators. These are things that do what intermittent fasting does for you, things like quercetin. And we're finding, as we blend these things, we get such a powerful response. I mean, the pain mitigating responses that we get when we blend these things together are just fantastic. And when you get into states where THC is legal, then we're starting to get into turning up the levels of THC. So you've got on one end, pure isolated CBD. It's good for inflammation and pain, but as you titrate up the levels of THC, you get more powerful responses because THC is such a strong agonist for the CB receptors. And you can get up to 20 CBD to 1 THC and still not have any appreciable psychoactive effect, but have a more powerful anti-inflammatory effect than you had without the THC. And then you go from there to 10 to 1, then 5 to 1, 3 to 1. I remember I did oral surgery out in California, and I handled these were real serious naturopath oral surgeons, and they didn't want me using any opioids at all or any narcotics. And so for the pain, I used 3 CBD to 1 THC, and that was able to handle all the pain. And I had a very strong inflammatory response. My healing was very quick. It always is. It always hurts like hell when I heal, and I heal fast. And I was able to handle that just with cannabinoids. And that was even before I started putting the curcuminoids in. And once I got the curcuminoids in, I was able to deal with a bulging disc, a herniated disc, with only curcuminoids, and until I was able to have some stem cell work done on that. And quite frankly, I think I healed the whole thing with what you'll see coming forward. I just did it on myself. This is an injection of nanocurcuminoids and cannabinoids together, and it stopped the whole inflammatory response. I did stem cell later, but I'd already killed all the pain with this kind of advanced medicine that we'll see coming.
So you actually injected directly into the site then with curcuminoids and also and cannabinoids and into that location.
Yeah, I did it subcutaneously around the disc. I had herniated L4, L5, and I didn't go into the disc. I did it just around that area with this nanocurcuminoid cannabinoid blend. It hurt a little more the next day, and the day after that, I woke up, and it was really miraculous because I went to a conference, and I was in so much pain. I was on so many drugs at that point. My more conventional doctor had given me Valium, oxycodone, and I forget the topical, super strong Nervine. And it was still breaking through all of that, and I had to fly somewhere and lecture the next morning at 8:30, and it was taking me about an hour and a half each morning to get up and get moving till everything moved around till I could even move. And then I was just in so much pain. I was like, how am I going to lecture? And it was that morning I woke up and I just hopped out of bed and it was all gone and it never came back again.
That's awesome, and that is just and that's just a kind of highlight to, because a lot of people, they think, well, these phytomedicine herbs and all of that's nice and fine, but the real strong and powerful punch are the pharmaceutical drugs. So this is just to really highlight that the pharmaceutical drugs had failed on you. And that is when you reverted, or that's when you went into using then natural compounds, and that is what changed the picture and outcome.
100%.
And just to highlight that even more is that these natural compounds, they are there then to restore health. They are there to modulate, to build up the system, and make us stronger after using it, compared then to the pharmaceutical drugs, where you then shut down processes, you kill natural function, you degenerate tissue, and it takes you further away from natural healing processes. And here we have options that we are then developing in the integrative field, in the holistic field, that can then accomplish the same thing as pharmaceutical and more, and it is you're stronger at the end of it.
Absolutely. Pharmaceuticals are short-term crutches, and there's some brilliant ones out there. I mean, I will make use of them when I need them, but they're not healing. And natural medicine is healing. It's been underfunded in its research on how to use it, because of how this system works, because of how patents are needed to drive approval, to protect money for investment, to drive approvals of drugs, to then create the standard of care using those drugs, and then the insurance companies fund that, and that whole thing is like self-perpetuating. But as enough, really it's going to be like the entrepreneurs of today, the ones that become very successful, that make just way too much money than they can spend. Those are the ones who are going to fund the real research and move natural medicine into the light that it can be in.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. A friend of mine, Dr. Paul Anderson, he was NIH wanted him to run a 5-year study on natural substances and cancer, and they pretty much gave him the carte blanche. You can do whatever you want and tell us what you find out. And after doing pretty much everything that he wanted, different IVs, he's big into nutritional IVs.
Right.
He noticed, his outcome was so much better than the outcome of the normal medical route, and the result from that was that they completely shut down his research because it was too good.
Yeah, see, they have their little CAM thing, complementary and alternative medicine, and you if you show them nice little tiny results, used with chemotherapy, this helped 10%. They love that. But then if you come out and you start breaking ground and really changing stuff and beating pharma's butt, that's not going to work well for you.
No, they don't appreciate that at all, and especially in such a golden, their golden egg when it relates to cancer research. That's a big one, and actually, I know we're wrapping up, but in regards to cancer and THC and CBD, the immune supportive properties that those substances have while you're dealing with something as dire as cancer, from my understanding, is tremendous.
It really is. And just before we wrap up, I want to throw out my take on CBD, THC, and cancer. CBD, at one level of dosage, is promoting cell-to-cell communication and homeostasis, and that's essential because it was broken in the cancer. The regulatory feedbacks have been broken in cancer, and CBD can help you restore those. At really high levels, it can act as a chemotherapy, a cytotoxic to the cells. But at high levels, THC is much stronger than CBD at being cytotoxic. So there's one level of use of it in cancer where you're using it as the chemotherapy and you're taking massive doses. I mean, you are just stoned to the bejesus for weeks when you're doing that. But if you're using other therapies for cancer, and even if they're chemotherapies, you can use CBD at lower doses to restore regulatory mechanisms and cell-to-cell communication. And I think that's the more important application of cannabinoids into cancer medicine.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shade. And I urge our listeners to take a look at his website. And they offer so many products, and it's a streamlined system that supports proper detoxification, along with the backdrop of using various hemp products to control the inflammatory signaling that takes place when you try to move toxins and metals and so forth. And what is the website where people can find you?
Yeah, the website for our general nutraceuticals is Quicksilver Scientific. The website for our CBD products is THR Technologies or thrtech.com. We have those separated because of credit card processing issues. Hopefully, they'll all be united on one site within 2 weeks or so. And then on YouTube, there's a Quicksilver Scientific YouTube channel. Education, I think, is the most important thing that I'm doing for the world. Well, I don't know. Those nanomedicines are pretty awesome, too. But education is a really big part of what I do. And the Quicksilver Scientific channel on YouTube, you've got 20 or 30 1.5-hour webinars, as well as a plethora of small videos on different products.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shade. I so appreciate you, what you do for the world, and taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you, Dr. Karlfeldt.
And that is it for today. You're listening to Health-Made Radio. You can check us out at healthmade.co. Remember, health is what you make it.